Viridia Prime was a jewel among worlds. From orbit, it appeared as a swirling emerald and azure sphere, its vast forests and crystalline lakes visible even from space. The atmospheric canopy above the planet shimmered with a characteristic violet-tinged iridescence, a testament to the unique atmospheric processing capabilities evolved by the native Sylvan people over millennia. The Sylvans themselves were as remarkable as their world. Tall, willowy beings with skin tones ranging from pale green to deep forest hues. They were a peaceful species whose culture and technology had evolved in harmony with their environment. Their atmospheric processing capabilities, biological at first, then augmented by sophisticated biotech, had made them invaluable to the New Galactic Alliance's environmental restoration projects across dozens of war-ravaged worlds. Alara stood at the edge of the crystal falls, the rushing waters cascading down into the misty valley below. As the youngest member ever appointed to Viridia's diplomatic council, she carried both the pride and burden of her people's expectations. Her pale green skin was adorned with the subtle leaf-like markings that distinguished her lineage as one of Viridia's oldest families, and her silver eyes reflected both youthful idealism and a wisdom beyond her years. "The water sings differently today," came a weathered voice behind her. Lorien, elder keeper of Viridia's histories and planetary lore, joined her at the precipice. His skin had darkened to a deep forest green over his 3 centuries of life, and the leaf patterns that covered his face and arms were intricate with age. "Can you really hear the difference, Elder?" Alara asked, her voice carrying both respect and skepticism. "When you've listened to the falls for as long as I have, child, you hear not just the water, but the story it tells of our world," Lorien replied, his eyes scanning the horizon. "And today, it tells of distant thunder." Alara followed his gaze skyward, where the violet-tinged upper atmosphere shimmered as it always had. Yet something was indeed different, a barely perceptible darkening on the eastern horizon. Her communication device chirped softly at her wrist. "Commander Valerius requests your immediate presence at the Central Defense Hub," the automated voice announced. Lorien nodded gravely. "Go. The waters have spoken truth again." The Central Defense Hub was housed within a living structure, a massive tree that had been carefully guided over generations to form chambers and passages within its enormous trunk. Despite the organic setting, the Central Command Room was a stark contrast of technology and efficiency. Holographic displays filled the air with data streams, and uniformed Sylvans moved with purpose between monitoring stations. Commander Valerius stood at the center, his muscular frame and military bearing setting him apart from most Sylvans. Unlike many of his kind, Valerius had spent decades serving alongside New Galactic Alliance forces, and he had adopted some of their martial posture and pragmatism. His forest green skin bore not just the traditional leaf patterns, but also the faint lines of battle scars, rare among the peaceful Sylvans. "Unidentified vessels have dropped out of FTL at the edge of our system," Valerius reported without preamble as Alara entered. 7 ships, military configuration. "They're not responding to standard NGA identification protocols." "Pirates?" Alara asked, though she feared worse. "No," Valerius said grimly, magnifying one of the holographic images. The vessel that came into focus was massive, sleek, and undeniably powerful, its hull bearing the unmistakable insignia of the old Galactic Council, with a stylized gauntlet overlaid. Praetorian Remnant. The name sent a chill through the command center. The Praetorian Remnant, a powerful splinter faction composed of the most hardline military and political leaders from the old Galactic Council that had once ruled the galaxy with an iron fist until its overthrow a decade earlier. Led by High Commander Kalen, they had rejected the democratic reforms of the New Galactic Alliance and disappeared into the outer reaches, taking significant military assets with them. "They're hailing us," a communications officer announced. "Put it through," Valerius ordered, straightening his uniform. The central hologram flickered and resolved into the image of a tall, steel-eyed human with close-cropped silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. High Commander Kalen wore a black uniform adorned with insignia that mimicked the old council's, but incorporated the gauntlet symbol of his Praetorian faction. People of Viridia Prime. He began without introduction, his voice as cold as space itself. I speak as High Commander of the Praetorian Order, true inheritors of the Galactic Council's mandate to maintain order and stability throughout civilized space. Alara stepped forward, adopting the formal stance of a Viridian diplomat. High Commander Kalen, I am Counselor Alara of Viridia Prime. Your presence in our system without prior notification violates multiple protocols of the New Galactic Alliance, of which Viridia is a protected member. What is the purpose of your arrival? Kalen's expression didn't change, but a slight narrowing of his eyes suggested annoyance at being addressed as an equal. The so-called New Galactic Alliance is a fractured, ineffectual assembly incapable of maintaining true galactic stability, he replied. Recent events have proven this beyond doubt. The Praetorian Order has therefore begun the necessary process of re-establishing proper governance in key strategic sectors. He leaned forward slightly. Your world possesses atmospheric processing technology vital to our stabilization initiative. You will surrender control of your primary atmospheric processing complexes and all related technology to Praetorian authority within one planetary rotation. This is not a negotiation. This is a directive for the greater good of galactic civilization. Valerius stepped forward, his posture tense. And if we refuse this directive, Commander? Kalen's smile didn't reach his eyes. Then Viridia Prime will be reintegrated into the proper order by whatever means necessary. I trust your people are wise enough to avoid such unpleasantness. The transmission cut abruptly, leaving the command center in stunned silence. Contact the NGA Council immediately, Alara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. We need to invoke our protection status under the Charter. I've already sent an emergency transmission, Valerius replied. But even at FTL speeds, it will take hours for any significant Alliance force to reach us. He turned to his officers. Initiate defensive protocols. Alert all atmospheric processing facilities to lockdown. And prepare the civilian shelters, just in case. Alara nodded grimly. I'll convene the Viridian Council. We need to decide our response. There is only one response to ultimatums like this, Valerius said, his eyes hard. Refusal. The emergency session of the Viridian Planetary Council was fraught with tension. Representatives from each forest region filled the circular chamber carved within the Parliament tree, their voices rising in a cacophony of fear and outrage. We cannot surrender our atmospheric technology, called out Counselor Niven of the Eastern Canopies. It would be tantamount to giving this remnant faction the ability to terraform or de-terraform any world they choose. But can we afford to defy them? Countered Counselor Brila of the Coastal Groves. Our defense capabilities are minimal. We've always relied on NGA protection. Elder Lorian, who rarely attended council sessions, stood slowly, and the chamber fell silent out of respect. 300 cycles ago, he began, his aged voice carrying easily in the hushed room. The first council ships came to Viridia. They too demanded our atmospheric knowledge, calling it vital to galactic stability. Our ancestors refused, believing such power should be used only with the consent of all living beings affected. The council rained fire upon our southern continent in retribution. He touched a gnarled finger to a green crystal hanging at his throat, a memory stone containing the recorded history of those events. It took 50 cycles for those forests to grow again. We survived then. We will survive now, but not by surrendering that which makes us stewards rather than conquerors. Alara rose next. I've received confirmation that the NGA Council is now in emergency session regarding our situation. Earth's Ambassador Rhodes is advocating strongly for diplomatic pressure, citing our protected status under the Charter. Diplomatic pressure. Valerius scoffed from his seat at the defense station. Kalen didn't bring warships to be pressured by diplomatic notes. Admiral Jien of Earth's Fleet Command is monitoring the situation, Alara continued, giving Valerius a pointed look. She has indicated that relief forces are being prepared. Prepared, but not deployed, Valerius noted. The NGA charter requires full council approval for military intervention unless an actual attack has occurred. Then we must make sure no attack occurs, Ilaris said firmly. I request permission to open a direct dialogue with the remnant forces through official NGA channels. If we can stall long enough for the Alliance to reach consensus. You believe they will negotiate in good faith? Valerius interrupted. No, Ilara admitted. But every moment we gain brings NGA forces closer to our system. The Council voted unanimously to authorize Ilara's negotiation attempt while simultaneously preparing their defenses and civilian population for potential conflict. As the session ended, Lorien approached Ilara. There's another aspect to consider. Young one, he said quietly. Our people's connection to Viridia's atmosphere is not merely technological. It is biological, spiritual. If these Praetorians seize control of our processing centers and attempt to use them without proper understanding. Environmental catastrophe, Ilara finished. I know, Elder. I will make this clear in my communications. Do so, Lorien nodded gravely. But remember, those who come with warships rarely have the patience to understand ecosystems. Aboard the NGA diplomatic vessel sent to establish a neutral communication channel, Ilara faced the holographic image of Subcommander Trevis, Kalen's appointed envoy. Unlike Kalen's cold precision, Trevis exuded contemptuous arrogance. Your request for an extension of the compliance deadline is denied, he stated flatly in response to Ilara's opening proposal. The High Commander's timeline stands. Subcommander, Ilara maintained her diplomatic composure. Viridian atmosphere processing is an integrated biological and technological system. Even if we wish to comply, a single rotation is insufficient time to safely transition control without risking catastrophic system failure. Your concerns are noted, Trevis replied dismissively. Praetorian engineers are more than capable of assuming control of your facilities. We've studied Viridian technology extensively. Then you should understand the risks involved in rushing this process, Ilara pressed. At minimum, we require 3 planetary rotations to ensure safe transfer protocols. Trevis's expression hardened. The High Commander's patience is not infinite, Counselor. 1 rotation, after which we will begin our inspection of your primary facilities to ensure they contain no hidden weapons systems or sabotage mechanisms. Inspection. Ilara's diplomatic mask slipped momentarily. That would violate multiple sections of the NGA charter regarding sovereign technological assets. The charter you hide behind has no authority with the Praetorian Order, Trevis snapped. Be grateful the High Commander offers you the dignity of compliance rather than immediate occupation. The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Ilara with the sinking feeling that negotiations had been a pretense from the start. Her suspicions were confirmed hours later when Praetorian ships established a blockade formation around Viridia Prime, positioning themselves to control all orbital approaches to the planet. They're deploying shuttles, Valerius reported as they monitored the situation from the defense hub. Designation, Inspection Team, headed toward the northeastern processing node. That's one of our smallest facilities, Ilara noted, but it's near the Emerald Valley settlement. Over 20,000 civilians. A deliberate choice, Valerius growled. They're establishing dominance while using civilian proximity as a shield against potential resistance. The Praetorian inspection shuttle, escorted by 2 combat-ready gunships, descended through Viridia's atmosphere toward the designated processing node. Sylvan facility workers, instructed to cooperate while carefully monitoring the inspectors, met the heavily armed Praetorian team with nervous courtesy. What happened next would be pieced together later from survivor accounts and facility sensor logs. The Praetorian inspection team systematically examined the processing equipment while scanning and copying technical data, actions far beyond the scope of a security inspection. When questioned by the Sylvan facility director, the Praetorian team leader ordered his subordinates to secure the control room, resulting in the detention of all Sylvan personnel. Unobserved, a Praetorian technician then placed a small device on the primary atmospheric catalyst chamber, ostensibly a diagnostic tool. Within minutes, the carefully balanced atmospheric compounds processed by the facility began to destabilize. Alarms blared as toxic byproducts formed and were released through the facility's distribution network into the surrounding region. By the time the Praetorian team evacuated, claiming a catastrophic mechanical failure, a poisonous cloud was spreading rapidly toward the Emerald Valley settlement. Emergency containment procedures managed to limit the worst of the contamination, but not before the toxic atmospheric pocket had reached outlying homes and farms. Hundreds of Sylvans suffered respiratory damage, and dozens died as their specialized breathing systems were overwhelmed by the toxins. From orbit, Kalen's flagship broadcast a system-wide message. This unfortunate incident demonstrates the dangers of outdated and poorly maintained atmospheric technology. The regrettable casualties might have been prevented had Viridian authorities accepted our assistance sooner. The Praetorian Order extends its condolences and renews its offer to assume control of all processing facilities for proper upgrading and safety. Protocols. In the hastily established medical center at the edge of the contaminated zone, Alara moved between beds of suffering civilians, her silver eyes dark with grief and rage. When her communication device signaled an incoming transmission from Valerius, she stepped outside the triage tent to answer. "We have proof," Valerius said without preamble, his voice tight with controlled fury. Facility sensors captured everything. The atmospheric poisoning wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate attack, disguised as an inspection. They planted a catalytic destabilizer designed to create exactly the toxic reaction that occurred. Alara closed her eyes briefly, processing the horror of such a calculated act. "How many?" she asked quietly. 47 confirmed dead. Over 300 with significant respiratory damage, many critical. Around her, the sounds of suffering, the distinctive wheezing gasp of Sylvans struggling to process toxic air, filled the night. In the distance, the contaminated zone glowed an unnatural purple under containment fields. "This crosses the final line, Valerius," she said, her voice hardening with resolve. "Prepare the secure transmission equipment. I'm going to address the NGA Council directly and invoke Article 7 of the Defense Charter. The Mutual Defense Clause," Valerius confirmed. "They can't ignore a deliberate attack on civilians." "They can't," Alara agreed, "and they won't." The emergency session of the New Galactic Alliance Council was broadcast across secured channels throughout Alliance space. Representatives from over 30 spacefaring species sat in the Grand Circular Chamber on Nexus Station, the Alliance's neutral headquarters. Earth's Ambassador Rhodes had the floor, his normally composed demeanor showing signs of strain. "The evidence provided by Viridia Prime is unequivocal," he stated, gesturing to the holographic display showing the Praetorian sabotage in detail. "This was not an accident, not an inspection gone wrong, but a deliberate attack on civilian infrastructure resulting in significant loss of life. By any reasonable definition, this constitutes an act of war against an Alliance protectorate." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber, particularly from representatives of species who had suffered under the old Council's rule. However, not all voices were unified. "While we condemn this tragic event," the Calcarian ambassador interjected, her crystalline form glinting under the chamber lights, "we must consider the broader implications of military engagement with the Praetorian remnant. Their fleet strength is estimated at nearly 30% of the former Council's naval capacity. So we should allow them to poison civilian populations because confronting them would be difficult," challenged the Tylorian representative, mandibles clicking in agitation. "The Praetorians deny responsibility," noted the Vex ambassador, its metallic voice emotionless. "They claim faulty Sylvan equipment caused the disaster, a lie contradicted by their own actions." Rhodes countered, "They've established a military blockade and are landing troops even as we debate. Viridia Prime has formally invoked Article 7 of our charter. We are obligated to respond." Admiral Jien, representing Earth's military command, rose to speak. A veteran of the war that had overthrown the old council, her weathered face reflected both concern and determination. "The Alliance fleet stands ready to respond," she stated plainly. However, given the distances involved and the Praetorian force already in the Viridian system, a full military response would require significant time to mobilize. In the interim, I propose deploying a compliance enforcement fleet to uphold blockade protocols and protect Sylvan civilians under Article 4 emergency powers. The debate continued for hours, eventually resulting in a compromise that reflected the fractured nature of the young alliance. While sanctions were unanimously approved against the Praetorian remnant, only a limited military response was authorized, not the full intervention that Viridia Prime had requested. Several powerful alliance members, particularly those farther from remnant space or those with significant economic interests that might be disrupted by full-scale conflict, abstained from voting for military action beyond the minimal compliance enforcement mission. On Earth, in the Fleet Command headquarters overlooking the Pacific Ocean, Admiral Jien briefed Captain Eva Rostova on her mission parameters. Rostova, a rising star in the fleet with a reputation for both brilliance and uncompromising integrity, listened with growing concern to the political constraints being placed on her operation. "To be clear, Admiral," Rostova said, studying the holographic mission orders, "I'm authorized to enforce standard blockade protocols, evacuate civilians if possible, and protect Sylvan noncombatants from direct attack. But I cannot engage Praetorian military assets unless fired upon first, even if they're clearly conducting offensive operations against the planet's surface." "That is correct, Captain," Admiral Jien confirmed, the disapproval in her voice subtle but evident. The Alliance Council failed to reach consensus on authorization for preemptive military action against Praetorian capital ships. "Politics," she added with a hint of disgust. "With respect, Admiral, these restrictions severely limit our effectiveness," Rostova pointed out. "By the time we arrive, the Praetorians will have established significant ground presence, without the ability to challenge their orbital superiority." "I am well aware of the tactical disadvantages, Captain," Jien interrupted, her expression softening slightly. "I fought alongside Admiral Harper in the liberation of the Tylorian homeworld during the Council War. I know what happens when we arrive too late with too little." She leaned forward, lowering her voice though they were alone in the secure briefing room. "Your official orders reflect the political reality of a divided alliance. Your mission reports will be scrutinized by every faction looking to justify their position. But on the ground, Captain Rostova, you must use your judgment to protect civilian lives by any means necessary within the technical bounds of your authorization." Rostova understood the unspoken directive. She would be walking a razor's edge between the letter of her orders and their spirit. "The Endeavor will be ready to deploy within 12 hours, Admiral," she said, standing at attention. "Good hunting, Captain," Jien replied. "And remember, sometimes the most important victories never appear in official reports." While the Alliance debated and Earth prepared its limited response, Viridia Prime suffered. The first Praetorian occupation forces landed at strategic points across the planet, prioritizing the major atmosphere processing centers and population hubs. Their initial proclamations promised minimal interference with civilian life for compliant populations, but the reality quickly proved different. Under Commander Valerius's direction, key Sylvan defense personnel and critical atmospheric technology experts had gone into hiding before the main Praetorian landings, taking with them vital knowledge and equipment components. This act of foresight infuriated the occupying forces, who responded by implementing increasingly harsh control measures against the general population. Residential zones were placed under strict curfew. Communication networks were severed or monitored. Any gatherings of more than 3 Sylvans became punishable by detention. Praetorian recruitment centers began conscripting able-bodied Sylvans for civil restoration projects, forced labor to repair infrastructure damage during the occupation, and to modify atmospheric processors for Praetorian specifications. In the deep forests of Viridia's southern continent, Far from the main processing centers that had drawn Praetorian attention, Commander Valerius established the Central Resistance Coordination Post. Natural caverns beneath the ancient root systems of millennium-old trees provided shelter that defied Praetorian sensors, while the dense canopy overhead obscured movement from orbital surveillance. We've established 12 additional cells across the northern and eastern regions, reported Silrina, a former atmospheric security specialist now serving as Valerius's chief of intelligence. Her forest green skin was smudged with natural pigments for camouflage, and like many resistance fighters, she had adapted her natural sylvan biorhythms to function primarily at night when Praetorian patrols were reduced. Communications? Valerius asked, studying the three-dimensional map of Iridia projected from a portable unit designed to emit minimal energy signatures. Limited but functional. We're using the old subsonic frequencies through the root systems for short range and atmospheric particulate dispersion for broader messaging. Valerius nodded approvingly. The Sylvan's natural ability to detect and interpret subtle changes in atmospheric composition, an evolutionary adaptation central to their processing capabilities, was now serving as an ingenious communication method invisible to Praetorian technology. Casualties from last night's operations? He asked, his expression grave. Silrina's luminescent eyes dimmed slightly. 7 lost in the coastal generator raid. The Praetorians had deployed additional security following our previous success at the northern hub. Valerius absorbed this news stoically, though each loss weighed heavily. The resistance had adopted hit-and-run tactics, targeting Praetorian supply lines, communication relays, and smaller outposts. While they couldn't directly challenge the occupiers' military superiority, they could ensure that controlling Viridia remained costly and difficult. And Counselor Ilera, he asked, still secure. She's moving between the northeastern settlements, coordinating civilian support networks and gathering evidence of Praetorian violations for transmission to any NGA vessels that might approach. The mention of the Alliance brought a shadow across Valerius's features. Any word on Alliance response? Nothing confirmed. Scattered reports suggest a small fleet may have entered the outer system, but Praetorian communication jamming makes verification impossible. Valerius was about to respond when Elder Lorien entered the command cavern, moving with surprising agility despite his advanced age. The ancient Sylvan had become an unexpected asset to the Resistance, his encyclopedic knowledge of Viridia's ecosystem providing innovations that repeatedly confounded the occupiers. The eastern forest speaks of heavy machinery moving toward the central processing complex, Lorien announced without preamble, referring to the subtle environmental indicators he could read better than any sensor array. Something significant shifts in the Praetorian strategy. They failed to get the processing centers fully operational without our experts, Valerius surmised. They may be bringing in their own technology to compensate. That would be disastrous, Silrina warned. Our processing centers are calibrated to Viridia's specific atmospheric composition. Introducing external technology without proper integration could trigger cascade reactions throughout the ecosystem. Precisely why we must accelerate our timetable, came a new voice as Ilera emerged from one of the route passages into the command center. Valerius straightened in surprise and respect. Counselor, we weren't expecting you until the lunar alignment. Circumstances have forced my hand, Ilera replied, her once immaculate diplomatic attire now replaced by practical forest leathers, though she still wore the silver circlet of her council position. I received confirmation through our deep space relay. An Earth fleet under Captain Rostova has entered the system under the banner of compliance enforcement. They're challenging the Praetorian blockade on legal grounds, but are constrained from direct military engagement unless attacked first. Half measures, Valerius growled. Perhaps, Ilera acknowledged. But Captain Rostova has established secure channel protocols on frequencies the Praetorians are unlikely to monitor. If we can provide detailed evidence of continued violations and atrocities, it strengthens the case for expanded intervention. And in the meantime, Silrina asked. In the meantime, Ilera's silver eyes hardened. We ensure that occupying Viridia remains too costly for the Praetorians to maintain. I've authorized implementation of Operation Verdantide. The name sent a ripple of reaction through the command center. Operation Verdantide was the most aggressive resistance plan they had developed, a coordinated, planet-wide series of strikes against major Praetorian installations, designed to liberate detention centers and recapture at least one major processing facility. The risk to civilian populations would be substantial, Valerius cautioned. The risk of inaction is greater, Ilera countered. I've seen the new Praetorian processing technology they're preparing to install. It's not designed for sustainable atmospheric management. It's designed for rapid resource extraction. They don't want our world's atmosphere for terraforming. They want to harvest our world's unique atmospheric compounds for weapons development. A heavy silence fell over the command center as the implications became clear. Viridia's atmospheric compounds, properly processed and concentrated, could potentially be weaponized to devastate the ecosystems of any world they targeted. How long before these Earth ships could provide meaningful support? Valerius finally asked. Captain Rostova estimates her fleet can establish full perimeter presence within 36 hours, Ilera replied. She's already begun challenging Praetorian vessels violating standard blockade protocols. Then we have our window, Valerius decided, turning to the tactical display. We launch Verdantide in 28 hours. That gives us time to coordinate all resistance cells and maximize the impact of Earth's arrival. As the resistance leaders bent over the tactical displays, finalizing their plans, none of them could know that aboard the Praetorian flagship in orbit, High Commander Kalin was reaching the limits of his patience with the troublesome world below. Captain Eva Rostova stood on the bridge of the ES Endeavour, an Aegis-class battlecruiser that had seen action in the final days of the Council War. Though upgraded with the latest Earth Defense Force technology, it remained a vessel designed for an earlier conflict. Much like the political situation she now navigated. Praetorian vessel Indomitable has adjusted course to intercept our patrol route, Captain, reported Lieutenant Commander Hayes from the tactical station. They're maintaining weapons hot, but not locked. Maintain course and speed, Rostova ordered calmly. Standard blockade pattern. Weapons on standby. Shields at navigational configuration. This dance had been repeated multiple times since the Endeavour and its escort ships. A mixed flotilla, including 2 VX sensor frigates and a Tylorian medical cruiser, had arrived in the Viridian system. The Praetorian forces made clear their displeasure at the NGA presence, but had so far avoided any action that would constitute a direct military provocation. Incoming transmission from the Indomitable Captain, announced Communications Officer Zhu. On screen, Rostova acknowledged, adopting the neutral expression that had served her well in these exchanges. The main viewport shimmered and resolved into the stern visage of Captain Thrace, a Praetorian officer with a reputation for ruthless efficiency. Captain Rostova, he began without preamble, your patrol route takes you within designated Praetorian security perimeter S7. Adjust your course immediately or be considered in violation of established security protocols. Captain Thrace, Rostova replied evenly. As I've previously clarified, New Galactic Alliance blockade regulations recognize no such designation. Under Article 4 of the NGA Charter, specifically sections governing protected member worlds, our vessels are authorized to maintain free navigation throughout the Viridian system, accepting only standard orbital safety exclusion zones. The Praetorian Order does not recognize NGA jurisdiction in this sector, Thrace countered, his jaw tightening. This is your final warning. Rostova maintained her composed demeanor, though internally she calculated the narrow path available to her. A direct confrontation would violate her orders, but continual acquiescence to Praetorian territorial claims would render her mission meaningless. Captain Thrace, I have transmitted the relevant legal protocols to your vessel 6 times in the past 30 hours. The Endeavour will maintain its current course as part of standard blockade enforcement. Any action against an NGA vessel conducting lawful operations would constitute a direct violation of interstellar law. I trust you understand the implications. Thrace's expression darkened. You test the limits of High Commander Kalen's patience, Rostova. Remember what happened to the last fleet that opposed the Praetorian banner. The transmission cut abruptly. Rostova allowed herself a small sigh before turning to her XO, Commander Ishida. Status of our probe network? She asked quietly. 93% deployed, Captain, Ishida reported. The VX vessels have successfully placed sensor platforms throughout the outer system. We're receiving data streams that bypass Praetorian jamming frequencies. And our communication with the surface resistance? Intermittent, but improving. Counselor Alera has established regular contact windows. The data they've provided on Praetorian activities is disturbing. Rostova nodded grimly. The evidence compiled by the Sylvan Resistance documented systematic abuses far beyond what had initially brought her fleet to Viridia. Forced labor camps. Summary executions of those who resisted. Environmental sabotage as punishment for resistance activities. Transmit the latest evidence package to Admiral Jien via secure quantum channel, she ordered. Flag it Priority Alpha with my personal authentication. Perhaps seeing the reality on the ground will strengthen the Alliance's resolve. Captain, interrupted Sensor Officer Chun, her voice tight with urgency. Drone surveillance platform Delta 7 is picking up unusual energy signatures from the southern continent, consistent with atmospheric ignition weaponry. Confirmed, tactical added. Praetorian ground forces are deploying incendiary weapons against suspected resistance strongholds in the Emerald Forest region. Civilian settlements within affected zones. Rostova's expression hardened. Her orders permitted intervention to protect civilian populations from direct attack. This clearly qualified, yet engaging Praetorian ground forces from orbit would almost certainly trigger a response from their fleet. Lieutenant Razak, she addressed her helmsman, plot an intercept course to establish position between Praetorian ground operations and the civilian zones. Commander Hayes, power weapon systems, but maintain targeting locks on unmanned drone platforms only. Will demonstrate capability without direct provocation. Captain, Ishida cautioned, this brings us much closer to the line. The line was crossed when they began burning civilians, Commander, Rostova replied firmly. Signal the VX vessels to maintain their sensor coverage. We need every second of these atrocities documented. As the Endeavour changed course, pushing deeper into the Viridian system, a scout drone on the far side of the planet captured something that would not reach Rostova's attention for crucial hours. The arrival of a massive Praetorian transport in low orbit above the largest atmospheric processing center. Within its hull rested a weapon that would soon force the galaxy's hand. In the burning forests of Viridia's southern continent, Operation Verdant Tide was underway. What had begun as a coordinated series of resistance strikes had evolved into a desperate struggle for survival as Praetorian forces responded with overwhelming force and a shocking willingness to inflict environmental damage. Commander Valerius led the central assault team, targeting the detention facility near the Western Processing Complex, where hundreds of Sylvan atmospheric technicians were being held. Their knowledge and skills were essential for any hope of countering whatever technological abomination the Praetorians were planning. Perimeter breach in 30 seconds, his second-in-command reported as they crouched in the undergrowth beyond the facility's sensor range. The detention center was a brutally efficient structure of prefabricated metallic components, surrounded by cleared land that offered little cover, a deliberate choice in the heavily forested world. Valerius touched the communicator at his throat. Diversion team status? In position came the response from Silrina, who led a smaller team on the facility's opposite side. Atmospheric packages primed. These packages were perhaps the Resistance's most innovative weapon, concentrated organic compounds that, when released, created dense fog banks that both obscured Sylvan movements and temporarily disrupted Praetorian sensor technology. Elder Lorien had developed them using his encyclopedic knowledge of Viridia's native flora. Initiate on my mark, Valerius ordered. 3, 2, 1. Execute. Across the facility perimeter, dozens of small canisters burst, releasing swirling mists that rapidly expanded in the humid Viridian air. Alarms immediately sounded within the compound, but the Praetorian response was hampered by the sudden sensor blindness and visibility reduction. Valerius led his team forward, their movements swift and practiced. Unlike the Praetorians, the Sylvans could navigate their native forests with minimal visual cues, using the subtle air currents and atmospheric composition to guide them through the mist. The perimeter defenses fell quickly. Praetorian guards, disoriented and isolated by the fog, were systematically neutralized with minimal casualties. The resistance preferred non-lethal tactics where possible, using concentrated plant extracts that induced temporary paralysis. Eastern Entrance secured, reported one of Valerius's team. Interior security hub located. Move in, Valerius ordered. Remember, priority is freeing the detainees. Secondary objective is data retrieval from their command systems. The interior assault proceeded with practiced efficiency. Years serving with NGA forces had taught Valerius military tactics that he had hoped never to use on his homeworld. Now, that knowledge proved invaluable as his teams systematically cleared corridors and secured key junctions. They encountered stiffer resistance near the central detention block. A squad of elite Praetorian guards had established a defensive position, their heavier weapons cutting through the mist that had penetrated the facility. Fall back to Junction 7, Valerius commanded as energy bolts sizzled past. Employ Echo tactic. His fighters retreated in practice formation, drawing the Praetorian guards into pursuit. As they passed the designated junction, hidden fighters triggered atmospheric pressure changes in the sealed corridor, a technique unique to Sylvan physiology. The sudden compression and decompression created a disorienting wave that staggered the pursuing Praetorians, leaving them vulnerable to the ambush that followed. Detention block ahead, called Silrina, who had rejoined Valerius's team after completing her diversion mission. Life signs register over 200 Sylvans inside. Valerius approached the massive security door, its control panel requiring Praetorian genetic authentication. He nodded to one of his tech specialists, who applied a captured authorization patch, obtained at great cost during an earlier mission. The door slid open to reveal hundreds of Sylvans in various states of distress. Most were atmospheric technicians or processing specialists, many showing signs of mistreatment or forced labor. They blinked in surprise at their sudden liberation. "We don't have much time," Valerius announced. "Those who can move independently, follow the green markers to the extraction points. Those needing assistance, our medical team will help you. Move quickly and quietly." As the evacuation began, Silrina approached with a grim expression. "Commander, you need to see this." She led him to a secure room adjacent to the detention area. Inside, holographic displays showed detailed schematics of what appeared to be a massive atmospheric ignition device, a weapon designed to trigger chain reactions within Viridia's unique atmosphere. This isn't just an occupation, Valerius realized with growing horror. They're planning to fundamentally alter our atmosphere, or weaponize it. The timestamps indicate deployment within 26 hours, Silrina noted, quickly copying the data to a secure drive. According to this, the delivery system is already in orbit. "We need to get this information to Counselor Alera immediately," Valerius decided, "and to Captain Rostova, if possible. This changes everything." Their discussion was interrupted by the facility's alarms shifting to a higher, more urgent tone. Outside, the distinctive roar of Praetorian dropships could be heard approaching. "We've run out of time," Valerius stated. "Silrina, get these people out through the secondary routes. I'll take a team to create a diversion." "The odds of survival for a diversion team," Silrina began, "are irrelevant compared to this information reaching the NGA." Valerius cut her off, taking the data drive. "Go." "That's an order." As Silrina reluctantly led the evacuees toward the hidden forest paths, Valerius gathered his remaining fighters. "We're going to give them something to chase," he told them grimly. "Anyone who wishes to join the evacuation instead may do so without dishonor." Not a single fighter stepped away. With nods of grim determination, they followed Valerius toward the facility's power core, prepared to ensure their people's escape at any cost. Aboard the EAS Endeavour, Captain Rostova studied the tactical display with growing concern. Her ship now maintained position between a Praetorian assault group and a civilian settlement zone, effectively shielding the Sylvan population from orbital bombardment. The Praetorian vessels maintained aggressive postures, but had not yet directly challenged her positioning. Captain, Communications Officer Zhu reported, "We're receiving a priority transmission from the surface. Heavily encrypted, using the resistance protocol you authorized. Route it to my station," Rostova ordered, moving to the secure communications terminal. The message was fragmented, likely due to Praetorian jamming efforts, but its content was unmistakable. Detailed schematics of an atmospheric ignition weapon, along with deployment timetables and a desperate plea from Counselor Alara. "Confirm authenticity," Rostova instructed her intelligence officer. "Verification complete, Captain." The encryption signatures matched Counselor Alara's diplomatic protocols, and the weapon specifications, he hesitated, are consistent with prohibited Counselor technology we encountered during the war. Rostova's expression hardened as she studied the weapon design. It was a banned device designed not for conventional destruction, but for atmospheric conversion on a planetary scale. In Viridia's case, it would effectively render the planet uninhabitable while harvesting the displaced atmospheric compounds for weapons applications. A world killer that technically didn't destroy the planet, merely made it impossible for its native species to survive. "This goes beyond my current authorization," she acknowledged grimly. "But the evidence is clear. This weapon violates every prohibition in the NGA Charter, as well as the galactic concords established after the Council War." "Your orders, Captain?" Commander Ishida asked. Rostova stood straight, her decision made. "Transmit this evidence to Admiral Jian via quantum channel, highest priority. Request immediate authorization for expanded intervention under the War Crimes Protocol." She turned to her tactical officer. "Meanwhile, bring all weapons systems to full readiness. We're moving from blockade enforcement to active prevention of a planetary-scale attack. This crosses every line the Alliance established after the last war." "Captain," Sensor Officer Santiago interrupted, "the VX cruiser Vigilant has detected a massive energy buildup on the Praetorian command ship. They're activating something in their main hold." Rostova's blood ran cold. "They're preparing the weapon for deployment. How long until Admiral Jian could receive our transmission and respond?" "At least 7 hours, Captain," Communications replied. "The weapon will be operational in less than 3, Tactical added grimly. Rostova faced the moment every commander dreads, when orders and moral imperatives diverge beyond reconciliation. Her authorization extended only to blockade enforcement and civilian protection, not preemptive strikes against Praetorian capital ships. Yet waiting for a proper authorization would mean the death of an entire civilization. "Set intercept course for the Praetorian command ship," she ordered, her voice steady despite the weight of the decision. "Prepare to broadcast on all frequencies, including Praetorian military channels. I want them to hear exactly why we're moving against them." As the Endeavour changed course, alarms sounded across the bridge. Multiple Praetorian vessels altering position to intercept, Tactical reported. "They're moving to protect their command ship. The VX and Tylorian vessels are requesting instructions," Communications added. "Inform our allies of the situation," Rostova ordered. "Request they maintain sensor coverage and be prepared to provide support, but they're not obligated to join what may become direct engagement." To her silent pride, both the VX sensor frigates and the Tylorian medical cruiser aligned their courses with the Endeavour, forming a unified, if outmatched, formation. "Open a channel to all vessels in the system," Rostova commanded, standing before the main view screen. When Communications nodded confirmation, she spoke with the full authority of her position. "Attention all vessels in the Viridian system. This is Captain Eva Rostova of the Earth Alliance ship Endeavour, operating under New Galactic Alliance authority. We have confirmed evidence that the Praetorian command vessel is preparing to deploy a prohibited atmospheric ignition weapon against Viridia Prime, in direct violation of the Galactic Concords and constituting a crime against sentience under Alliance law. She paused briefly, aware that her next words would likely trigger a battle her small fleet could not win without reinforcement. In accordance with my authority to prevent genocide under the Emergency Powers Act, I am moving to intercept and neutralize this threat. All non-Praetorian vessels are advised to clear the engagement zone. Any Praetorian vessel attempting to prevent this intervention will be considered complicit in war crimes and engaged accordingly. She nodded to communications to end the broadcast, then turned to her bridge crew. Battle stations. All hands prepare for combat engagement. She met each officer's eyes briefly, seeing in them the same resolve she felt. Whatever comes next, remember why we're here. Some lines cannot be crossed without response, whatever our orders might say. On the surface of Viridia Prime, Counselor Alara received word of Rostova's broadcast from a resistance communications specialist. Hope and dread warred within her as she realized the implications. She's challenging their entire fleet with just a handful of ships, Alara said to Elder Lorien, who stood beside her in the hidden command center. Because it is right, Lorien replied simply, as we must now do our part, however desperate. Alara nodded gravely. Is Valerius's team in position? They await only your word, Lorien confirmed. Though the cost will be high. Too high, Alara acknowledged, yet less than the alternative. She activated the secure communication system that would transmit her orders to all resistance cells across Viridia. This is Counselor Alara. Initiate Operation Last Light. All teams, proceed immediately to designated targets. Last Light, the most desperate contingency plan they had developed. A coordinated ground assault on the primary control nexus that would link to the orbital weapon. Located within the heavily fortified central processing complex, now controlled by the Praetorians, it represented a virtual suicide mission for the attackers. But if Captain Rostova was willing to risk her fleet against overwhelming odds, the Sylvans would match that courage on the ground. I should be with them, Alara said as the acknowledgments came in from resistance leaders. Your place is here, Lorien countered firmly. Should we fail, someone must remain to lead our people. And should we succeed, someone must rebuild. Before Alara could respond, the bunker's emergency alert system activated. A resistance scout's voice came through, breathless with urgency. Counselor, massive Praetorian troop movements across all sectors. They're pulling forces from outlying areas, concentrating them at the central complex. They know we're coming. Alara's heart sank. Their plan relied on surprise and dispersion of Praetorian forces. If they were consolidating their troops at the very target Valerius's team was approaching, we must warn them, she began, but Lorien placed a gnarled hand on her arm. It is too late, the elder said gently. They are already engaged. Now, we can only trust in their courage and in the Alliance forces above. In orbit, the confrontation had escalated to the brink of open warfare. The Endeavor and its small allied contingent approached the Praetorian command ship, which now sat at the center of a defensive formation of 5 heavy cruisers and multiple support vessels. Praetorian vessels have locked weapons on us, Captain, Tactical reported. They're not firing yet, but their positioning indicates they intend to block our approach at all costs. Maintain course, Rostova ordered. Focus sensors on their command ship's main bay. I need confirmation on the weapon's status. Energy readings consistent with final preparation stages, Science Officer Hakim reported. Estimate 15 minutes until full activation. Captain, communications interrupted. Incoming transmission from the Praetorian flagship. Its High Commander, Kalen himself. On screen, Rostova acknowledged, straightening her uniform unconsciously. The view screen displayed Kalen's cold, imperious features. Unlike their previous encounters, a hint of genuine anger now showed in his steel-gray eyes. Captain Rostova, he began, his voice controlled but threaded with menace. Your actions constitute a direct act of war against the Praetorian Order. Stand down immediately and withdraw from Viridian space, or be destroyed. High Commander, Rostova replied firmly. We have confirmed your vessel is preparing to deploy a prohibited atmospheric ignition weapon against Viridia Prime. This constitutes a violation of galactic law so severe that it supersedes all jurisdictional disputes. Power down the weapon and submit to NGA inspection, or we will be forced to disable your vessel. Kalen's expression hardened further. You have no conception of the larger forces at work, Captain. The Viridian atmospheric compounds are essential to galactic security the weak alliance cannot maintain. Their processing capabilities will serve a greater purpose under Praetorian control. By murdering an entire species, Rostova challenged. There is no security in genocide, Commander, nor in becoming what we fought to overthrow a decade ago. You've made your choice then, Kalen concluded coldly. Your ships will make a fine example of the price of defiance. He turned slightly to address someone off-screen. Commence fire. No survivors. The transmission cut abruptly, and immediately multiple weapons locks registered across the Endeavor's defensive systems. Evasive pattern Delta. Rostova ordered as the first salvos of Praetorian energy weapons lanced toward them. Return fire. Focus on their forward weapon emplacements. Signal our allies to target propulsion systems, if possible. The Endeavor shuddered as its shields absorbed the initial barrage. The battle was joined, a desperate few against a superior force, with a planet's fate hanging in the balance. On the surface, Commander Valerius led the most critical mission of Operation Last Light, a direct assault on the central processing complex where the weapons control nexus was located. His force consisted of elite resistance fighters, augmented by civilians with specialized knowledge of the facility systems. They approached through burning forests, using the smoke and heat signatures to mask their advance from Praetorian sensors. The Praetorians had employed scorched earth tactics, deliberately burning vast swathes of forest to deny the resistance cover, unwittingly providing a different kind of concealment. Perimeter in sight, Valerius reported through his scorched mask, which filtered the toxic smoke. Heavy Praetorian presence. At least 4 platoons of mechanized infantry and fixed defensive positions. They were expecting us, his second-in-command observed grimly. But not from this approach, Valerius countered, indicating the northern perimeter where the fires burned hottest. No living species would approach through that inferno. No non-Sylvan species, corrected a soft voice behind them. Valerius turned in surprise to see Elder Lorien. His ancient form somehow materialized among them despite the Council's direct orders for him to remain at the secure command center. Elder, you should not be here, Valerius protested. The risk is necessary, Lorien interrupted with quiet authority. What we attempt requires knowledge only I possess. The ancient atmospheric harmonics cannot be manipulated by technology alone. Valerius wanted to argue further, but recognized the determination in the Elder's eyes. He nodded reluctantly. Stay with the second team. They'll create the diversion while we... No, Lorien stated simply. I will create the path through the fire. The rest of you will follow. Before anyone could object, the ancient Sylvan moved forward toward the wall of flame that separated them from the facility's northern perimeter. Raising his gnarled hands, Lorien began a series of fluid gestures while his voice produced sounds too low for even Sylvan ears to fully perceive. The effect was immediate and astonishing. The flames before him began to shift, swirling into a vortex that pulled away from a central corridor. The superheated air coalesced into a visible tunnel through the inferno, its edges still burning furiously, but its center cool enough to traverse. Now, Lorien commanded, his voice strained with effort. I cannot maintain this for long. Valerius signaled. His teams forward, and they rushed through the miraculous passage in the flames. They emerged directly behind the Praetorian defensive line, which was oriented toward the expected approaches from the east and west. The surprise was complete. Before the Praetorians could reorient their defenses, Valerius's fighters had breached the perimeter and penetrated the outer security ring. Lorien followed more slowly, his energy visibly depleted by the atmospheric manipulation he had performed. "Elder, remain here with the security team," Valerius instructed, helping Lorien to a defensible position within the first ring of the complex. "We'll proceed to the control nexus." Lorien gripped Valerius's arm with surprising strength. "Find a harmonic inducer," he said urgently. "It will be connected to the primary atmosphere processor. If they activate it while linked to their weapon—" "I understand," Valerius assured him. "We'll destroy it or die trying." Lorien's ancient eyes held his for a moment. "Not destroy. Redirect. Remember our teaching. The flow can be changed, but never stopped entirely without consequence." With those cryptic words echoing in his mind, Valerius led his strike team deeper into the facility, fighting through increasingly desperate Praetorian resistance. Unlike their earlier operations, stealth was no longer an option. This was a frontal assault against prepared defenses, and the casualties mounted with each secured checkpoint. By the time they reached the central control chamber, Valerius's force had been reduced by half. Those remaining were wounded, but determined, the desperation of their mission overriding pain and exhaustion. The control chamber doors were sealed with Praetorian security measures beyond their capacity to breach directly. Valerius studied the situation briefly, then made a decision. "Plant the explosive charges," he ordered. "We'll make our own entrance." As his team prepared the limited explosives they had brought, alarm klaxons suddenly blared throughout the facility. The announcement that followed froze them in place. "Attention, all Praetorian forces. Alliance vessels have engaged our orbital fleet. Accelerate weapon deployment to Priority Alpha. Repeat, accelerate atmospheric ignition to Priority Alpha." "They're moving up the timetable," Valerius realized with horror. "We have minutes, not hours." Above Viridia Prime, the space battle had escalated to desperate intensity. The Endeavor had sustained significant damage but remained operational, its advanced shielding technology, derived from the Aegis system that had helped win the previous war, proving resilient against standard Praetorian weapons. The Allied VX and Tylorian vessels had suffered worse, with one VX frigate disabled and the Tylorian cruiser maintaining position only through constant emergency repairs. Yet they had inflicted damage of their own, disabling two Praetorian support ships and forcing their formation to adjust repeatedly. On the Endeavor's bridge, now operating on emergency power with damage control, teams fighting multiple system failures, Captain Rostova maintained her focus on their primary objective. "Status of the Praetorian command ship?" she demanded as the bridge shuddered under another impact. "They've moved it to the center of their defensive formation," Tactical reported. "Our sensors confirm the weapon bay is now fully open. Energy signatures indicate final activation sequence." "We're out of time," Rostova realized. She assessed their situation with brutal clarity. They could not break through the defensive screen before the weapon deployed. A change in strategy was required immediately. "Engineering," she called to her chief engineer via internal communications. "Status of the experimental shield modulator?" "Online but untested, Captain," came the harried response. "The modifications you requested are complete, but I cannot guarantee stability above 50% power." "Understood. Stand by for my command." Rostova turned to her tactical officer. "Prepare to reconfigure all power systems for a focused shield projection. Target coordinates: the Praetorian command ship's weapon bay." Her order raised surprised looks across the bridge. The maneuver she was proposing had never been attempted in combat. Using their Aegis-derived shield system not as defense, but as a directed energy weapon, channeling the ship's remaining power into a concentrated burst that might disrupt the atmospheric ignition weapon's activation sequence. "Captain," her XO warned, "that would leave us without shields for at least 60 seconds during the reconfiguration. In our current tactical position, we'll be exposed." "Yes," Rostova acknowledged, "which is why we need to change our position." She turned to helm control. "Lieutenant Razak, plot a direct course for the command ship. Maximum thrust on my mark." "Direct course." Razak confirmed, eyes widening slightly. "That puts us directly through their heaviest defensive screen." "Exactly." Rostova confirmed grimly. They won't expect it because it's borderline suicidal. But it's also the only vector that gives us a clean shot at the weapon bay with a modulated shield burst. She opened a ship-wide channel. All hands, this is the captain. Secure for maximum acceleration and prepare for extreme, evasive maneuvers. What we attempt now has never been done. But the alternative is watching a world die. I know each of you will perform your duties with the honor and courage the Alliance expects of us. Closing the channel, she met the eyes of her bridge crew one by one, seeing in them the same resolve that filled her. Helm, engage on my mark. 3, 2, 1. Execute. The Endeavor surged forward. Its engines pushed beyond safety limits as it accelerated directly toward the heart of the Praetorian formation. The unexpected maneuver caught the Praetorian vessels momentarily off guard, their fire coordination disrupted by the seemingly irrational charge. Engineering, begin shield modulation sequence. Rostova ordered as energy blasts impacted their gradually failing shields. Tactical, all available weapons fire on any vessel directly in our path. Clear us a corridor to that command ship at all costs. The bridge shook violently as a Praetorian cruiser landed a direct hit on their weakening port shields. Damage reports flooded in from multiple decks. Shields at 28% and failing, Tactical reported. We've penetrated their outer defensive screen, but cannot survive another coordinated barrage. We don't need to survive long, Rostova countered, her focus unwavering. Just long enough. Range to target. 37 seconds at current velocity, Helm responded. Shield modulation at 63%, engineering reported. Pushing beyond that risks system collapse. Rostova nodded. Hold at current levels. Divert all non-essential power to forward momentum. On the main view screen, the massive Praetorian command ship grew larger, its weapon bay now clearly visible. A gaping maw in its ventral section where energy patterns swirled with increasing intensity. 20 seconds to optimal firing position, Tactical announced. Praetorian vessels adjusting to intercept. Evade as needed, but maintain our approach vector, Rostova ordered. That weapon bay is our only target. The ship lurched violently as another blast struck home, this time penetrating their weakened shields and scoring a direct hit on the starboard nacelle. Starboard propulsion at 40%. Engineering called out. Compensating with port thrusters. 15 seconds to position. Helm reported, voice steady despite the chaos. A new alarm sounded, more urgent than the others. Captain, Science Officer Hakim called out. The weapon has begun its firing sequence. Energy buildup indicates discharge imminent. Rostova's expression hardened. We fire now. Engineering, initiate shield burst. Maximum power. The Endeavor's remaining energy reserves channeled into the experimental modulation system, converting their defensive shields into a focused energy surge directed precisely at the Praetorian weapon bay. The burst manifested as a blinding blue-white beam that lands from the Earth vessel toward its target. The effect was immediate and catastrophic, but not entirely as planned. The modulated shield energy struck the already active weapon system, creating a volatile reaction cascade. Instead of simply disabling the weapon, the interaction between the two energy systems triggered a partial, uncontrolled discharge. The Praetorian command ship's weapon bay erupted in secondary explosions as the atmospheric ignition device fired errantly, its targeting systems disrupted by the Endeavor's attack. Rather than the precisely calibrated discharge that would have rendered all of Iridia Prime uninhabitable, the weapon released a chaotic burst of energy toward the planet's surface. On the bridge of the crippled Endeavor, now drifting powerless from the backlash of their desperate gambit, Rostova watched in horror as the energy surge struck Viridia's atmosphere. Even partially disrupted, the weapon's effect was devastating. Vast swathes of the upper atmosphere ignited, creating a rippling cascade of fire that spread across multiple continents. No, she whispered, rising from her command chair despite her injuries. We were too late. Not entirely, Captain, Hakim reported, studying the sensor readings. The weapon discharged at approximately 23% of intended capacity, and the targeting was severely disrupted. It's affected approximately 30% of the planetary surface, primarily unpopulated regions, rather than the global effect they intended. A bitter victory, Rostova thought. Millions saved, but the cost of irreparable damage to large portions of a living world. The Praetorian command ship is breaking. Formation, tactical announced. Their primary systems appear severely damaged. They're attempting an emergency FTL jump. Indeed, the massive vessel was pulling away from the battlefield, trailing debris and venting atmosphere from multiple breaches. Before any of the damaged Alliance vessels could react, it vanished into FTL, leaving its support ships suddenly leaderless. The remaining Praetorian vessels are ceasing fire. Communications reported with surprise. They're requesting terms. Rostova barely registered this information, her attention fixed on the burning world below. "Give me a secure channel to any resistance communications still functional," she ordered. "Priority override. We need to coordinate rescue and containment operations immediately." In the central processing complex on Viridia's surface, Commander Valerius and his remaining fighters had finally breached the control chamber just as the errant weapon discharge struck the planet's atmosphere. The resulting energy cascade had disrupted the facility's systems, killing several Praetorian technicians and damaging the control interfaces. "The harmonic inducer," Valerius shouted over the blaring alarms, pointing to a pulsing crystalline device connected to the primary atmosphere processor. "We need to disconnect it before the feedback loop destroys what remains of our atmosphere." As his team fought to reach the device against the few surviving Praetorians, the facility shook violently. Through the chamber's observation dome, they could see the sky burning, literal fire spreading across the upper atmosphere as the weapon's energy transformed Viridia's carefully balanced ecological system into an inferno. "It's too late," one of his fighters cried in despair. The weapon fired. "Not completely," came Elder Lorian's voice as the ancient Sylvan limped into the chamber, supported by two resistance fighters. Despite his injuries, his eyes blazed with determination. "The patterns are wrong for a full ignition. Something disrupted it. Now we must do our part." He approached the harmonic inducer, his gnarled hands hovering above its pulsing surface. "This device channels the harmonic resonance of our atmosphere. The Praetorians intended it to amplify the weapon's effect, but it can also be used to dampen it, if properly attuned." "How?" Valerius demanded, desperate for any solution as reports flooded in of spreading atmospheric fires. "The old ways," Lorian replied simply. "The knowledge I have carried for 3 centuries." He placed his hands directly on the crystal, which responded with increased luminescence. "Protect me while I work. This will take time, and the connection is not without cost." Understanding dawned on Valerius with horrifying clarity. What Lorian proposed was the forbidden technique of direct atmospheric communion, using a Sylvan's natural connection to their world to influence massive atmospheric systems. The historical records spoke of such attempts ending invariably with the death of the Sylvan, their consciousness essentially dissolving into the atmospheric patterns they sought to control. "Elder, there must be another way," Valerius protested, but Lorian's expression silenced him. "There is not," the ancient Sylvan stated with finality. "Now do your duty, Commander, as I do mine." With no alternative, Valerius positioned his remaining fighters to defend the chamber against any Praetorian counterattack. Through the observation dome, they watched in grim silence as fire continued to spread across the sky, knowing their world was being irrevocably altered even if they succeeded. Beneath Lorian's hands, the harmonic inducer began emitting a different pattern of pulsations, synchronizing with the Elder's own biorhythms. His eyes closed in concentration, his breathing becoming shallow and irregular. The crystal's glow intensified, spreading up Lorian's arms and gradually encompassing his entire form. Minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the facility's alarms and the distant sounds of fighting elsewhere in the complex. Gradually, subtly, the patterns of fire in the atmosphere began to change. Not extinguishing, for that was beyond even Lorien's abilities, but shifting, coalescing into contained bands rather than spreading unchecked across the entire planet. Lorien's form began to flicker, becoming translucent in places as his physical connection to reality weakened. Yet the harmonic inducer glowed ever brighter, its influence on the atmosphere growing stronger as the Elder poured his life essence into the connection. "It's working," one of the fighters whispered, pointing to the atmospheric displays showing the fire bands stabilizing into distinct patterns. "He's containing the reaction." Valerius watched in awe and grief as Lorien's sacrifice manifested. The Elder was literally becoming one with Viridia's atmosphere, his consciousness and life force diffusing into the world he had served for 3 centuries. With a final surge of energy that momentarily blinded everyone in the chamber, the harmonic inducer reached peak resonance. When their vision cleared, Elder Lorien was gone, not fallen, not collapsed, but simply absent, as if he had never occupied physical space at all. Only the still glowing inducer remained, now pulsing in a steady, harmonious rhythm that matched the newly stabilized atmosphere patterns visible through the dome. The silence that followed was profound, broken finally by Valerius's communicator signaling an incoming transmission. "Commander," Camalera's voice strained but determined, "our sensors show the atmospheric reaction is stabilizing. What's happening down there?" Valerius stared at the empty space where Lorien had stood moments before. "Elder Lorien," he replied simply, his voice thick with emotion. He has become one with Viridia to save what remains." There was a moment of silence as Alara absorbed this news. "And the Praetorian weapon?" "Partially discharged," Valerius reported, shifting back to military precision with effort. "Alliance vessels must have disrupted it somehow. The damage is extensive, but not total. Perhaps 30 to 40% of our atmosphere is affected. Captain Rostova is attempting to establish contact," Alara informed him. Her fleet engaged the Praetorian forces directly, despite their orders. The Praetorian command ship has fled the system, and their remaining vessels have stood down. A bitter victory indeed, Valerius thought, echoing Rostova's sentiment in orbit above. A world permanently scarred, millions of hectares of forest burning, atmospheric balance irreparably damaged. Yet total extinction had been averted. For now, that would have to be enough. "Secure the facility," he ordered his remaining fighters, "and protect the harmonic inducer at all costs. It's keeping what remains of our atmosphere stable." As his team moved to comply, Valerius stepped closer to the observation dome, gazing out at the burning sky that now contained the essence of Elder Lorien. Somewhere up there, beyond the flames, Captain Rostova's crippled fleet maintained watch, having risked everything to prevent a genocide. "The final line was crossed today," he murmured, thinking of the old Sylvan teaching about boundaries that should never be violated. "And we have all paid the price." 1 month after what became known as the burning of Iridia, the new Galactic Alliance Council convened in special session. The chamber, normally a model of elegant efficiency, had been transformed. The ceiling displayed a real-time holographic projection of Iridia Prime's scarred atmosphere, a constant, sobering reminder of the consequences of their initial inaction. Ambassador Rhodes of Earth stood at the central podium, his normally diplomatic demeanor replaced by forthright urgency. "Honorable representatives," he began, "we gather today to finalize the amendments to the Alliance Charter proposed in the wake of the Viridian crisis. The measures before you represent the most significant revision of our founding principles since the Alliance's creation." He gestured to the display above them. "That burning world stands as testament to our failure, a failure of resolve, of unity, and of moral clarity. When Viridia Prime invoked our mutual defense clause, we responded with debate while a people suffered. When evidence of atrocities mounted, we authorized half measures constrained by political calculation. Only when brave individuals like Captain Rostova and her crew chose conscience over orders did we avoid witnessing the complete extinction of the sylvan species. The chamber remained silent, the truth of his words undeniable. The full horror of what had nearly occurred, and what had actually transpired, had shocked the conscience of the Alliance. Public outcry across member worlds had forced even the most reluctant governments to acknowledge the need for reform. The Charter amendments before you establish clear, non-negotiable protocols for intervention against genocide and planetary-scale attacks. They create a rapid response force, not subject to the political deadlocks that paralyzed us. They strengthen prohibitions against weapons of mass destruction and establish severe consequences for their development or deployment. And perhaps most importantly, they recognize that some moral imperatives transcend politics, that there exist final lines which, once crossed, demand immediate and unified response. A new figure approached the podium as Rhodes stepped aside. Counselor Alara of Viridia Prime, her once vibrant green skin now bearing the grayish tinge common to all surviving Sylvans after their atmosphere transformation. The distinctive leaf markings of her lineage had faded, another consequence of the weapon's effect on Sylvan biology. I speak today not only for the survivors of Viridia Prime, she began, her silver eyes sweeping, the Assembly, but for Elder Lorien, whose consciousness now exists within our wounded atmosphere. For Commander Valerius, who even now leads the ecological recovery efforts on our surface. For Captain Rostova and the crew of the Endeavor, who defied constraints to prevent genocide. Her voice strengthened as she continued. The price we have paid is beyond calculation. 40% of our world's atmosphere remains in flame, maintained in containment patterns only through the ongoing sacrifice of Elder Lorien's consciousness within the harmonic matrix. Our forests will take centuries to recover, if they ever fully do. Our people's biology has been permanently altered, our connection to our world fundamentally changed. She paused, letting the weight of these consequences settle across the chamber. Yet we endure, and from our endurance comes determination, not for vengeance, but for justice, not for punishment, but for prevention. The Sylvan people do not demand retribution for what was done to us. We demand reform to ensure it never happens again to any world, any people, anywhere in this galaxy. The chamber erupted in applause, representatives rising to their feet in respect and agreement. When the ovation subsided, Admiral Jian of Earth Fleet Command took the podium, her weathered features solemn. The military amendments proposed today reflect hard lessons paid for in blood, she stated bluntly. The restrictions placed on Captain Rostova's mission nearly resulted in planetary extinction. Her decision to exceed those restrictions, at great personal risk, ultimately saved millions of lives, but left her facing potential court-martial under our previous protocols. She gestured to where Rostova sat in the gallery, still bearing visible injuries from the battle. It is unconscionable that we placed a commander in the position of choosing between her oath of service and her moral obligation to prevent genocide. The reformed command structure before you ensures no Alliance officer will ever face such an impossible choice again. The voting that followed was unprecedented in Alliance history. Unanimous approval of the full package of reforms, a moment of unity born from collective shame and renewed resolve. The new Galactic Alliance had been tested and had initially failed, but from that failure came transformation. As the formal session concluded, Alara joined Captain Rostova in a quiet observation chamber overlooking the vast nebula that surrounded Nexus Station. The tribunal cleared all charges against you and your crew, Alara noted, studying the human captain's profile. Rostova nodded. Admiral Jian made certain of that, though I would have made the same decision again, regardless of consequences. As would we all, when facing such a choice, Alara agreed. She gazed out at the swirling stellar gases beyond the viewport. Have you received your new assignment yet? The Endeavor is still undergoing repairs, Rostova replied. But once completed, we'll be heading the first patrol under the new charter protocols. The Praetorian Remnant remains a threat, though a diminished one after Kalen's defeat. Diminished but not destroyed, Elara cautioned. Our intelligence suggests Kalen survived, though his command ship was severely damaged. He will rebuild. He will return. And when he does, he'll face a unified alliance, Rostova assured her. The lines have been drawn more clearly now. The consequences of crossing them understood. Alara's expression remained troubled. At such cost, Captain. At such terrible cost. Yes, Rostova acknowledged softly. That is the burden we now carry. The knowledge of what happens when final lines are crossed, and the price that follows. 6 months later, Elara stood on a viewing platform overlooking what had once been the lush Emerald Valley. The landscape below was transformed. Blackened earth where ancient forests had stood, crystallized soil where intense heat had literally melted the ground. And above, the atmosphere continued to burn in controlled bands, their violet-tinged fire a constant reminder of what had been lost. Yet amidst the devastation, small signs of renewal had begun to appear. Sylvan ecological experts, working alongside scientists from across the Alliance, had developed heat-resistant hybrids of native flora. The first experimental plantings were visible as tiny green dots across the scorched landscape, modest beginnings of a recovery that would span generations. Commander Valerius joined her at the railing, his once immaculate military bearing now replaced by the practical garb of the recovery teams he led. Like all surviving Sylvans, his skin had taken on the grayish tinge that marked their altered biology, but his determination remained undiminished. The xenobotanists from Earth believe the new hybrids can establish root systems even in the crystallized soil zones, he reported. It will take decades, but eventually they may form the foundation for a new forest ecosystem. Elara nodded, taking whatever hope was available. And the atmospheric stabilization? Holding, Valerius confirmed. The harmonic patterns established by Elder Lorien remain consistent. The fire bands haven't expanded in over 3 months. They stood in silence for a moment, watching as recovery teams moved methodically across the valley floor below, planting seedlings in a careful grid pattern. The memorial will be unveiled tomorrow, Elara finally said. Will you attend? Valerius hesitated. I'm needed with the recovery teams. The work doesn't pause, even for remembrance. The memorial isn't just for remembrance, Elara countered gently. It's for renewal of purpose, for commitment to the future we're trying to build from these ashes. After a moment, Valerius nodded. Then I will be there. The following day, representatives from across the Alliance gathered on a plateau overlooking both the scarred valley and the still-burning atmospheric bands above. At the center of the gathering stood a simple monument, a crystalline spire rising from the blackened earth, its surface etched with the names of those lost in the burning of Iridia. Admiral Jian attended, representing Earth and the Alliance military. Captain Rostova stood at her side, the Endeavor in stationary orbit overhead. VX representatives, their metallic forms reflecting the fiery sky, maintained solemn positions alongside Tylorian dignitaries and dozens of other species. Elara addressed the assembly with simple dignity. This memorial stands as both remembrance and warning. We honor those who perished when a final line was crossed, when one faction's ambition outweighed the sanctity of an entire world's existence. But we also affirm that from this devastation, we have forged a new understanding. She gestured to the representatives gathered around her. The unified response to our tragedy has proven that different species, different worlds, can stand together against atrocity. That shared moral principles can overcome political division. That some lines, once established, can be defended. As she spoke, a subtle change became visible in the atmospheric fire bands above. They seemed to pulse in rhythm with her words, shifting in patterns that somehow conveyed sentience rather than random combustion. Elder Lorien's consciousness, still present, still watching over his wounded world. We do not know if Viridia Prime will ever fully recover, Elara continued, her voice carrying across the hushed gathering. The ecological damage may be beyond complete healing. Our people's connection to our world has been fundamentally altered. Yet we choose to see in this tragedy not just an ending, but a beginning, the birth of a stronger, more resolute galactic community that recognizes some boundaries cannot be violated without consequence. She placed her hand on the memorial's crystalline surface, its structure capturing and refracting the light from the burning atmosphere above. Let this stand as testament to what happens when final lines are crossed, and to our commitment that such lines will be defended, whatever the cost may be. As the ceremony concluded, Captain Rostova approached Alara at the memorial's edge. "We've received intelligence reports," she said quietly. "High Commander Kalen has been located in the outer systems, gathering forces, rebuilding his fleet. The Alliance Council has authorized a preemptive operation under the new charter provisions. The Endeavor will lead the mission?" Alara asked. Rostova nodded. "We depart tomorrow, this time with full authorization and a unified fleet." "And it, Captain," Alara said simply. "Not for vengeance, but for justice." "For both," Rostova acknowledged, gazing up at the burning sky that would likely remain so for centuries to come. "Some debts can never be fully repaid, but accountability must still be demanded." As Rostova departed to prepare for her mission, Alara remained at the memorial alone, communing silently with the atmospheric patterns that contained Lorien's essence. A subtle shifting in the fire bands suggested acknowledgement of her presence, a wordless communication that transcended physical form. "We will rebuild, Elder," she whispered to the burning sky. "Not what was, for that is gone forever, but something new, something stronger. A world and a people tempered by fire, like the hybrid seedlings taking root in the ashes below." The atmospheric bands pulsed once more in what seemed like agreement, before resuming their steady containment pattern. Alara turned her attention to the valley below, where tiny green points marked the beginning of recovery across the blackened landscape. From devastation, new growth. From tragedy, new resolve. From the cross line, a new understanding of what must be defended at all costs. The scarred galaxy would heal, much as Viridia would, incompletely, bearing permanent marks of what had transpired, but moving forward nonetheless. The final line had been crossed, and the price had been paid. Now came the long, difficult work of building something worthy of that terrible sacrifice. As twilight settled over the transformed landscape, the controlled atmospheric fires cast an otherworldly glow across the memorial, and the gathering of unified species below, different worlds, different biologies, standing together in the shared understanding that some boundaries must remain inviolable, whatever the cost of their defense.